Good morning, everyone, and my name is Benjamin. As always, welcome back to our weekly updates of the presidential election map and the model on which I based off of, which is here. And there's a link to that in the description, as well as a link to my Senate model. There's also a link to my Patreon if you honestly think this content is worth it. I hope you do, but right now I've only got one donation level, and it's like $1, so I don't know. Anyway, looking at the map, I've got a second map here to kind of highlight something. If you look at the map, nothing much has changed except Texas has gotten into the likely column. It's because Trump had a surprisingly good week of polling last week, which I think threw everybody for a loop because of some of the comments he made about certain freshman Democratic senators. I honestly thought that was going to hurt him, and it turns out to have had the opposite effect. And a lot of the news is calling it racist, and I think some of it was a little. It wasn't exactly the best things to say, but I think he's kind of mirroring a lot of the nation in that they're not thrilled with the way some of the freshman Democratic senators have been acting. And definitely not the legislation they've been trying to pursue. They refuse to work within the confines of the merit-based system that the House of Representatives is based upon. They seem to be more happy burning bridges than trying to build coalitions. They aren't willing to compromise their principles, and that's not necessarily a bad thing if you're unwilling to compromise your principles, but they're doing so in a way that is not beneficial to the overall long-term goal that they want to achieve. They're presenting themselves as people who just you cannot work with them, and so people aren't working with them. And then they're complaining about it afterwards. So, they're complaining about the fact that people won't work with them to pass legislation or get things done. But the truth is, when you aren't willing to compromise, not just your principles, but just aren't willing to compromise on your ideas, that's what happens. And of course, they're trying to blame all sorts of craziness. But anyway, because my model currently factors in fundamentals, it's showing that Donald Trump would win the popular vote by a little under 3%, which I'm just going to round up to a full 3% just to make it easy for the calculus that I'm going to show on this other map. So this is what the model looks like, and you can match this yourself. And if you really want, you can go over here and look at what the polling only shows, and that changes a lot less frequently because it doesn't factor in approval rating, doesn't factor in the incumbency factor that I have, and it doesn't factor in the economic factor that I have in effect in the actual model. So if you want to look at what the polls, purely polls only look like, then you can go with that. But if Donald Trump were to win the popular vote, and hilariously, the polls only, the state and national mean tab shows Donald Trump just edging out in the popular vote. So you can do the calculus that I figured out for this next map that I'm going to show you with that. And that is this. So I figure the nation, everything else being equal, a Democrat should win the popular vote with a 2% margin in the two party vote share just overall. About it doesn't really matter. It's about the same. So 51 to 49 in favor of the Democrat. However, because of state partisanship, what this means is that a Republican can still carry the Electoral College and probably would still carry the Electoral College. Now, this is what would happen if my model is 100% accurate, and this is what happens on election, and it's 100% accurate on election day with the numbers that are currently in the forecast page, right? And that's a 4% improvement over what you would expect. So I've taken into account the partisanship, and then if X state is 4% more Republican than the nation as a whole, since the Republican is winning the nation by 3%, they'd win that state by, you guessed it, 7%. 3 plus 4, 7. Yeah. So Trump is winning the nation by 3%. It's a 4% improvement over where they should be. So I'm just factoring it in. And what winds up happening is that Trump flips 3 states, Nevada, Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Maine at large. He comes within 1% of flipping Colorado and Virginia. Delaware is almost in the tilt category, aka it's almost within 5%. New Mexico is almost within, it's like within 3% or something. Now, obviously, I doubt this scenario is going to happen. I expect the popular vote to be not only much closer, but probably slightly favor the Democrat. But with some wiggle room, obviously. I think we need to make that as clear as day. There is wiggle room. I like basing everything based off of a range. This is a point forecast, but I like to treat, I try to treat this as a range. For example, if a state is in the tilt category, it's basically dead even, and it really could go either way. If it's in the lean category, it's more than likely going to go for that party, but it could go the other way if the numbers are off by just enough. Like, the polling information is off by just enough. Likely, there's a very small chance it goes to the party that isn't favored, but it's just not worth it to talk about because the polling numbers would have to be so far off that it's just not really worth it to talk about. Also, grain of salt on New York. I think we're dealing with small sample size, as well as we don't have, as well as the fact that I'm including a home state effect, and that's probably what's putting it into the likely category. Not that I think it's going to be less than that. Anywhere else where I can put a grain of salt on this to just say, hey, let's pump the brakes on this, let's make sure that we're... And honestly, not really. I mean, you can make the argument that I should put a grain of salt on the upper Midwest and the Rust Belt, but my model is showing Donald Trump ahead there because he is doing well with his national approval rating. If we go over here, we're sitting at 46%, which is above where I think he needs to be in order to win the 2020 election. Based off of both state partisanship, national partisanship, as well as the fact that Obama had a broadly similar approval rating when he won. Now, he didn't have as high a disapproval rating. That should be, I should make that as clear as day. His disapproval rating was hovering around that. I think he was still positive at this point, as in above water. But it was getting closer. It was within 2 or 3%, if I remember correctly, where his approval rating and disapproval rating were. But he was above water. Donald Trump is clearly below water, underwater on that. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. And remember, when you read polls, always look at the crosstabs. Don't try and unskew them. Don't try and get upset about that. Look at the questions about health. Look at the questions, the order they're asked. Look at the results of the crosstabs, but don't get too deeply involved in those because sometimes they can be a little out of whack. Plus, the margins of error and sample sizes of the subgroups are often pretty bad. Which it happens, okay? You're not going to be able to sample, the right amount of people for each group. You can only do the best you can to. You can only do the best you can with the numbers you have. Anyway, I want to thank all y'all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy. Bye.